Hi, I'm Tom with a list of interesting things. Today is Veterans Day, known as Armistice Day in Europe and Remembrance Day in Canada. On this day, 102 years ago, on the 11th day of the 11th month, at 11 o'clock in the morning, the First World War finally ended. But that's an interesting thing for another day. Today on the list of interesting political things are the Trump campaign's electoral lawsuits. It has now been 5 days since the overwhelming majority of news networks projected the race in favor of former Vice President Joe Biden, officially making him President-elect, and Kamala Harris the Vice President-elect. This is a historic time in U.S. history, but staying true to form, Donald Trump and his campaign have chosen to go in a, creative direction. For the last several months, Donald Trump and many of his closest allies in the Republican Party have been building a narrative centered around fraud. He has asserted on a number of occasions that the only way that he could lose to Vice President Biden is if Biden cheats. It seems now that he's making good on his promise. Following an outcry from a large percentage of his supporters, and with unprecedented support from the head of the Justice Department, Bill Barr, even over the counsel of Barr's colleagues, Trump and his legal team have filed suit. In total, they have challenged election results in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. This would, in theory, bring Joe Biden's total down from the 306 that it currently is projected to be down to 237. Let's dig into these and discuss their viability. We're going to see if we can determine if they're likely to impact the results of the election. To do this, we're going to be using Time Magazine's assembled list of the lawsuits. We're going to use these because they discuss the suits in a decent amount of detail, and they do so in a fairly objective manner. This is an overview and will exclude a lot of details. I'll leave extensive links below, but as always, I encourage you to do your own research. We're going to start with Pennsylvania, and we're just going to go through these one by one. Multiple legal battles over the Keystone State's election laws were underway well before the election, but this week, Trump campaign upped the ante. Pennsylvania Attorney General Josh Shapiro said in an interview that there has been a lot of noise about litigation, but it has had zero material impact on the electoral process. The count has continued, legal votes are being tallied, and soon the Commonwealth will respect the will of the people and certify a vote. Since Tuesday, the campaign has filed at least 5 separate lawsuits with mixed results. Number 1, to compel the Philadelphia election officials to stop counting ballots. This has been roundly dismissed by a federal judge. To compel state election officials to allow Trump campaign officials closer observation to the counting process. A state judge ruled in the campaign's favor, allowing campaign officials to observe Philadelphia's process from a 6-foot distance. Philadelphia election officials appealed the decision to the state Supreme Court. On November the 9th, the court agreed to hear the case. Levitt says that this ruling will likely affect the pace of the count rather than the outcome. He says, imagine a gymnasium with observers lining the walls. To let the observers get closer, they've got to move the count closer to the walls and not be counting in the center. Since people can no longer count in the center of the gym, the count is going more slowly. This one is one of those interesting ones. I think that this is more designed to cast doubt on the election process rather than a serious attempt to overturn the results. Because even if it transpires that Pennsylvania election officials have not been following official procedure, that will not change the result of the election. It would at best result in a recount, which would do very little to change the actual results. As we can see in Pennsylvania, Joe Biden is up by 48,000 votes. Even if they do a full recount, it is very unlikely to change. Moving right along. Number 3, to compel Pennsylvania Secretary of State Kathy Boockvar and all 67 counties to impose an earlier date for voters to show proof of identification if it was not on their official ballots. This one has to do with Pennsylvania's rule about curing ballots. If your ballot is not properly filled out, I should say the envelope which contains your ballot is not properly filled out, then you were given a grace period in which to come in and either correct your ballot or cast a new affidavit ballot in lieu of your vote being thrown out completely. This one, again, in spite of the fact that it was denied, again, even if it was the case that they won this particular lawsuit, this would only affect votes in the 2,000 to 4,000 range, not the 50,000 that they need to overcome. Number 4, to compel the Montgomery County Board of Elections to stop counting mail-in ballots. In this one, litigation is ongoing. The campaign and the Republican National Committee filed suit to halt the process of counting mail-in ballots in Montgomery County, one of the counties in suburban Philadelphia, alleging that the Board of Elections was counting 600 ballots that had not been placed in secrecy envelopes and therefore were not complying with requirements. Even if, again, we're going to see this as a theme over the course of this discussion, even if this goes through, this would throw out, at most, 600 ballots and result in a recount. Litigation is ongoing, so we'll see where that one lands. Number 5, to intervene in an already existing dispute before the Supreme Court about whether ballots the state received after 8 p.m. on Election Day should count. Again, in this one, litigation is ongoing, but justices have already weighed in on this. If I recall correctly, Justice Kavanaugh spoke on election, on ballot deadline extensions a number of times, and has relatively consistently ruled in favor of those deadlines being in place. And again, even if this is successful, the number of ballots received after Election Day would not overturn the results. Moving right along. Going on to Nevada. With the Trump campaign narrowly trailing Biden in the state, the Trump campaign has backed 2 cases to impact the counting of ballots. Number 1, to impose an injunction on the automatic signature verification machines used in Clark County as ballots continue to be counted. This one was rejected by a federal judge, ruling that federal judges should not be involved in state election administration, and there is no evidence that Clark County is doing anything unlawful. This has to do with that individual who was told by election officials on Election Day that her ballot had already been cast. And this is really a very interesting one, because it implies they imply heavily that this sort of election impropriety is widespread, but they assert in this lawsuit that over 3,000 instances of ineligible individuals casting ballots has taken place. But even if that is granted, Biden is up by you should never do math live on air. Is up by over 30,000 votes in the state of Nevada. Even if they manage to take those 3,000 instances, even if they manage to take them, they're still, 36,000 votes behind? This is insane. Aaron Ford, Nevada's Attorney General, called Stokey's allegations absurd. While the Attorney General's office normally does not comment on pending litigation, I feel compelled to dispel the misinformation being circulated to undermine the public's trust in our election. Number 2, to compel state election officials to allow the public closer observation at a Clark County ballot counting facility. This is very similar to that one we saw a little while ago in Pennsylvania. Yeah, here it is. This is not one that I think anybody has any problem with. If one campaign feels that they are not close enough to the ballot counting process, they should be allowed. It is reasonable to entertain the idea that they should be allowed closer to the ballot counting process. However, even if they are moved closer to the ballot counting process, all that would result in is a full recount. And as we've discussed, recounts do not change votes that much. Moving on to Michigan. Oh, by the way, a district judge rejected this lawsuit. And then the Republicans and the campaign reached a settlement, according to local news. So the ballot counting areas were, in some cases, rearranged. Moving on to Michigan. Let's take a look at Michigan before we start. In Michigan, Joe Biden is up by 140,000 votes. Did I do that correctly? Yeah, 140,000 votes in Michigan. There are 2 cases since Election Day. Number 1, to halt the counting of absentee ballots on the grounds that campaign officials had not been given access to observe the process as required by state law. Michigan Court of Claims Judge Cynthia Stevens denied the campaign's request on November 6th. This is one of those ones that we have seen a couple of times. Even if this goes through, it will only result in a recount. Number 2, to halt the certification of election ballots in Detroit, Michigan, Michigan's largest city. Judge Timothy Kenney denied the motion for injunctive relief on November 6th, saying that there was no evidence that oversight procedures had not been followed. Again, this one is really, really weird. Just like in this one, even if they win this overwhelmingly, the only thing that it will do is invoke a recount. Even if a recount is invoked, 150,000 ballots are not going to be changed. So I think that it's reasonably safe to say that even if they are entirely successful in both Nevada and Michigan, even if they are entirely successful, those will still go to Joe Biden. Moving right along. I believe next on the list is, yes, Georgia. This is a fun one. They have filed one suit in Georgia to disqualify 53 ballots. A poll watcher in Chatham County reported seeing a stack of late ballots that may have arrived after the 7 p.m. Election Day deadline get mixed in with other ballots that had arrived on time. A Superior Court judge in Chatham County rejected this suit on the 5th after hearing testimony from county officials that the ballots had in fact arrived on time. There is no evidence that the ballots referenced in the petition were received after 7 p.m. on Election Day, the court found. We're seeing this theme again. Even if this is entirely successful, this will not affect the results of the election. It really doesn't look like it's going to be successful, but even if it is, it won't change anything. In Georgia, Joe Biden is up by 14,000 even votes. Yes, I can do math. He's up by 14,000 votes. This 53 will not change, and there's already a recount in Georgia in the works. The recount is not going to change 13,000 votes any more than this 53 ballots will. Moving on. In Arizona, finally, Fox News and the Associated Press have declared Biden the winner of the state, but other networks have called off, deeming the race too close to call. On November 7th, the Trump campaign and the Republican National Committee filed a lawsuit in state court alleging voters' ballots had been rejected because they contained bleeds, splotches, and stray marks. These allegations appear similar to claims circulating on social media that ballots would not be counted if voters filled them out using a Sharpie marker. Election officials have said that these claims are false. A lawsuit with similar allegations was filed in the same court system by a group of voters who were represented by a conservative legal fund on November 4th. Plaintiffs dropped the suit on November the 7th. They did not provide a reason for dismissing the case. That's it. That's it. That's all in Arizona. That's 100% of it. So I think that with that in mind, assuming that Arizona goes the way that it is looking like it's going to go, which is Biden up 13%, I think that it's pretty safe to say that Arizona is going in that column. That puts Joe Biden at 270. I also think that given the flimsy nature of the Georgia lawsuit, that Georgia is also going in Biden's favor, I should say. So the only one that has any sort of merit is Pennsylvania, which even if he wins, he still loses the race. So of these, if they make it to the Supreme Court, are any of them likely to succeed? I don't think so. A few of them could be meritorious, particularly in Pennsylvania, but in best case scenario, they would result in a recount in Pennsylvania, and a recount in Arizona, and a recount in Nevada, and a recount in Michigan. And the recount in Georgia is already ongoing. As we saw in 2000, recounts rarely change more than a couple hundred votes. There's been a lot of stir about this, but it seems to me that these lawsuits are just hot air. Even if they do reach the Supreme Court, given the statements by Justices Kavanaugh and Roberts in favor of absentee ballots and states' rights to conduct elections, Trump is extremely unlikely to win. I think it's safe to say that unless something changes, on January 20th, we can expect President-elect Joe Biden. So until next time, be like the Trump campaign's lawsuits. Be hopeful and tenacious. And above all, be interesting. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.